Hello again. I'm Ken. I'm visiting with Mike. Mike, I'm really looking forward to more ideas in the process of seeing lasting change in an organization, progress. Let's keep going.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning is those case studies I looked at. Nehemiah, Bratton, Ono, Eunice, a whole bunch of people like that.
And those books are in the first video, in the description of the first video. People can
Okay.
find those and look them up.
Yeah, and they're available at the library. They're well documented. And the thing that I wanted to stress today is it's not related, it's not limited. What we're discussing is not limited to large organizations. It's applicable to to the family level all the way through large organization. So the principles and the process of change is not limited to large organizations. But common to all of those is the mindset of the leader, the values of the leader. And being aware of the values that we have is crucial because that colors every action and reaction that we have to things. I was looking at some other stuff recently, and I found an old quote from Andy Grove. Andy Grove was the chairman of Intel, large computer chip company. And his comment was, "Only the paranoid survive," which, and I can understand that because right now Intel is having trouble. So, you know, he's gone, but the truth is it is a challenge. And when you look at that, that same statement is comparable to what Carol Duke said when he says you either have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. The point is you've got to look at the situation. You've got to be objective. You've got to challenge. You have to strive forward. And the other quote that I mentioned last time was one from Ono that says, if there's no problem, that's a problem. In other words, you ain't looking because there's always opportunities. Uh, and then a question became, well, that's fine, but how do you illustrate that? And if you look at the companies from the 60s to today, many of them, most of them have disappeared. You look at the airline industry as an example. Pan Am, TWA, Eastern Airline, Allegheny, all of those companies are no more on the radar screen. Now there's new ones, but the point is some disappeared. And it's not limited to the airline industry. The same is true with the retail business. I remember the day when Kmart was the wow, it was revolutionary kind of thing. You're gone. Sears, another mega organization, gone. So the point is that change and issues really have to be anticipated and confronted. If not, then you're the endangered species list. The other thing I was going to mention today is one source that I like is Gallup. Gallup organization will make surveys. And one of the key surveys is employee engagement. And they look at how many people are engaged, how many people are not engaged or actively not engaged. And 30% are engaged and 25% are actively unengaged. So when you look at that, well, I say, well, it's good. There's 30%. The truth is that you have an organization, it's like a chain, and a chain is as strong as the weakest link. So a few people in the what's this thing you're saying? A fly in the ointment or the soup or something, you spoil the broth kind of thing. It doesn't take very much to screw up the works, even though a lot of people are not subscribing to that. So it's important to confront those things. And the last thought that I was on that to encourage people to really take a personal assessment is in the Bible in John 8:32, when it says the truth shall set you free. And that's relating to salvation from a religious context, but in some ways it's also true in everyday life. Things will either constrain you or box you in or you're addicted or you get free. And if you get free, then guess what? You can achieve greater things. So all of those things relate to the importance of the leader and the issue to really confront reality. And not only reality in a sense of what it is, but the potential, what could be. One of the biggest motivators that I find is when you are able to verbalize what's the end point, the promised land, the land of milk and honey. It's important to motivate people to want to change, because otherwise, what do you mean? I'm comfortable with this situation. You're asking me to change. What is that going to cost me? People are rather reluctant to change and willing to adapt sometimes the nonsense that's taking place because it's comfortable. Change can be challenging, but at the end, you're a lot better off with it. So that's one comment I wanted to make in general. It's that while we're looking at large organizations and individuals in those organizations, it's applicable to the whole spectrum of functions and a spectrum of organizations. So now I'd like to go back to Nehemiah. The next passage that there is in Nehemiah is in chapter 2. The king recognizes that his demeanor is affected by something that's bugging him. So he's asking him and say, well, what's bugging you? What's the matter with you? And he tells him. And then the king says, well, what do you want? So I said, I'd like to go back and rebuild the place of my ancestry. And the first question he asks is, how long are you going to be gone? And then Nehemiah follows up and says, if it pleases the king, in verse 7, it says, I like to have those following things. And the first thing that he asks is a charter. And very quickly in an organization, people will challenge you and saying, oh, what makes you right? What do you think? Who do you think you are? Kind of thing. So unless you have a charter, in this case, it was a charter to pass on to the governors surrounding that area, people will challenge you, and we'll see those same faces coming up later on in the text. The second thing that he asks in verse 8 is resources. What does it take? And you have to get the charter from the king and says, okay, here's your budget, here's your whatever, okay? And then the last one on verse 9, it's security. What if, people start shooting at us kind of thing on the way? Well, you got the soldiers and the officers to escort him all the way to the promised land. So you see that his departure or his request with the king is to have a package that's agreed to that will protect him and kind of line things up for when he needs to do the work. You see the same thing with Bratton. Bratton, the chief of police from New York City, had to have strong support from Giuliani, who was the mayor. And you see that throughout the book, that the relationship sometimes is not necessarily the best because Giuliani is thinking politics and Bratton thinks about reducing crime, and sometimes those things don't line up. So how do you navigate all of that? But the point is that there was that kind of support all the way up. The same thing with the turnaround of Nissan. You know, when Nissan, when the fellow Gossen got in there, the first year that he got there, the year before, they had $6.5 billion loss. That's a lot of money. The following year, a year later, they had a profit, net profit after tax. In other words, they paid their dues to the government. They had a profit of 2.7 billion. So a $9 billion kind of swing. But there again, you had to have support from the French company who financed his going over there. You had to have the support from the Japanese government to allow him to do the certain things that he was supposed to do, and also from the shareholders and the employees. And a foreigner coming into a Japanese company at culture shock, which it was, kind of thing. So you have to have that support, because otherwise it will undermine your efforts. I mentioned once before that in my consulting days, not every assignment was very successful. And those places where it wasn't successful, hopefully I'm not passing the buck, but the relationship with the top dog in the company was not totally lined up with the things that I was trying to do. So eventually people respond to that one way or another, but not necessarily in support of what you're trying to accomplish. So you have to have that support, that the package that will allow you to succeed. If you don't have that, don't even start. I wish I'd done that in a few assignments where it was kind of painful, and I was saying, well, maybe I should have said, hey, this isn't working. There's no point, this is it.
It's interesting to me that Nehemiah was ready with an answer. He had done some planning while he was doing his mourning.
Yes.
So he could ask for these three things. He could get the charter, he could get the support, he could get the protection. He knew what he wanted or needed to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, and he was prepared with an answer.
Yeah. So the next thing after that, then we have in 215, that 211 to 215 is showing up on the scene. And the first thing that he talks about is the first 3 days. What does he do? He gets on a donkey and goes around the wall and inspects it. And what I find interesting there is he's not asking people what the situation is. He's going there to observe firsthand. And not only that, he says he doesn't tell anybody what he's doing or where he's going. He's doing that at night, which is kind of interesting because in some ways it's acknowledging that in every instance, there will be naysayers. People say it will never work, the litany of negative thoughts. And the point is he wants to know firsthand what's what. And you cannot delegate that inspection, that finding out. Bratton did the same thing. He rode into police cars in New York City before he started. Gossen, which was interesting, he interviewed over 600 people before he took the position. 600 people is a ton of people, from customers, from bankers, from employees, from union, you name it. So the point is that you got to do your first-hand assessment, unfiltered, because anything else that you get is somebody else's perceptions. So you get the spin, there's something, not necessarily that it's colored because of what their intent is, but we all have our own biases. So you've got to go first hands. I'll give you another example of why it's important. One time I was visiting a company in Vancouver, BC, and they were making products for the marine industry. So we're talking to the quality control manager, and he says, well, I inspect the parts and this is the typical kind of process for quality control. So I said to him, well, do it. Show us what you do. You got a little bit hot under the collar, and I said, come on, you're us. Show us how you do that. So, okay, he said, okay, I'll do it. So he says, follow me. We have to walk about 100 feet within the plant to go and get gauges, things that you use to put into holes to see if it fits or not. So we go over there, and there's quite a few of those tools. So he gives us some of them to carry with him. So we only make one trip. In other words, typically we'd have to make several trips. Okay, then we go back, and then he goes through the thing. The point is if I accepted his point, well, you understand what the process is. Yeah, I know what the process is, but do it. Because if I hadn't seen him doing it, I would have missed the whole business of him going over there and taking them from the production area. So then the question is, okay, why only one set of tools, Well, the company doesn't want to spend the money. But the point is what does it cost to get another set versus the trip back and forth? And if he's using them, means that the production people can't use them, and vice versa. So time loss, whatever else. So again, I'm going back to the business of observing firsthand what's happening, because unless you see the situation, you're not in a position to really have a true assessment of what's taking place.
That's the real world. Thank you for that example. We're about out of time. Do you have any final thoughts or any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
Well, the final thought is that you cannot do that through delegation. You've got to do it firsthand. And it's one of the things that, for instance, with Ono, as an example, and in Toyota, he's visiting a location, and there's one plant that they won't take him. So he says, I want to go to visit that place. So the local people say, well, no, there's nothing to see there. I want to see that place. So they take him over there. Guess what? It's a burial ground for all the rejected stuff that's not needed in the production area. So they put it over there. And say, well, what's this? The point is you can't be blocked off. You've got to see the whole thing, and you've got to do it firsthand, because people learn how to accommodate situation, and unless you observe it, people will continue to repeat past performance. Therefore, the truth just sets you free.
This is leadership and relationship and organizational gold.
Yes.
Thank you. I look forward to our next visit.